Our numbers seem to be slowly growing. We should be able to take all the members that want to join this particular Zoom session. And we still got another minute or so before we begin, but again, as you come onto the system, please mute yourself and please do not share your screen.
Gene, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I will not be, I'm doing this on an iPhone, so I will not be able to see any chat. If there are questions in chat,
If there are, we'll bring them to your attention.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I have 6:30 at this time, so I would like to call the October 7th, 2020 meeting of the Tarrant County Historical Society into session. And I understand, and as all you may understand, that these are really strange times right now. And the fact that we are doing our meeting here through Zoom, I think is indicative of how bizarre the times have really become. In our attempt to maintain social distancing, and I think we're doing a very good job at it tonight, and fortunately, I don't see anyone wearing masks, so I presume you're at home and you're in a safe spot, so that's a good thing as well. But because of how crazy it's been, I think we would be well served to remember the society members whose lives have passed this past year. We've had a number of members who passed, and included in that is Mrs. I.G. Cooper, the Right Reverend Sam Halsey, Mr. Wallace Hutchinson, Miss Sissy Lale, and Miss Philip Thomas. And any time we lose members, it's a loss to the society, it's a loss to us as individuals. And if we can, let's just take a moment to remember these people. Thank you. This new system that we're launching here is our first, and of course, being the first, I'm sure we are going to experience some hiccups. We just try to do the best we can, but this pandemic has really forced the society to reevaluate the way it operates and the way it needs to operate for the future. So among the things that we have done over the last few months, we have launched a website. Now we've had a Facebook page for some time, but we have a new website. And if you haven't had the chance to check it out, I will share the screen just very quickly here to show you this so that you can see what we've been working on. This is the Tarrant County Historical Society website, and the web address is www.tarrantcountymhs.com. When we were trying to buy the domain name, there were a number of Tarrant County names that had already been chosen, so we had to figure out a way that we could bring in the society in the best way possible. But one of the things that you will be able to do on this new website You'll be able to find information about future meetings. You'll also be able to join and pay your membership dues, because we have set it up so that you can pay with a credit card, and then that money can be directly deposited from PayPal into the Tarrant County Historical Society banking account. And I think this is a positive for the future, and it really gives us an opportunity to grow for the future. And I know a lot of people are hesitant about putting their credit cards into websites. Please feel free and don't worry about this site, because it does have built-in mechanisms to protect it from from any potential hackers or scammers that you fear that might secure your information. But with that being said, I would like to ask our secretary, Brenda Matthews, if she is willing to read the minutes, or as if always, if the society would like to waive the reading of the minutes. Is there a motion? Okay, there is a motion to waive the reading of the minutes.
And a second.
I second.
And a second. So if you support, just raise your thumb. Okay. It looks like there's enough people here. A majority of people want to waive the reading of the minutes, so we'll do so. And Brenda, I'm sorry, you will not get to show your face on Zoom. Okay. Next is our financial report. And Gordon Stone is our organizational treasurer. And Gordon, would you like to offer the opportunity to share the organization's financial wherewithal? Okay, let me find Gordon on here. Well, Gordon told me he had a report, and he told me he was going to attend. Perhaps he's still navigating the stages of Zoom. For a lot of us, we have been playing with Zoom for months now, so we have some understanding of it, but I can tell you, Zoom is not intuitive, and Zoom does not always work at the speed that you're accustomed to with web browsers and web apps. So,
Gene,
Gordon, yes.
Gordon told me that we have a good amount of money in our bank account, a little over $50,000, because all of the memberships came in. $1,000 from the Pate Foundation came in. I think the Cappers money came in. So
Okay.
We have done pretty well. And he said he's going to have to give some of it to Ron to give away pretty quickly here.
Well, and we contracted with an individual to build the website, and the charge for that, the base charge for building the website, was only $750. So I think we got a very good deal with that. Now there were some other charges, because we did have to buy some programs and buy some links and other things, but we certainly didn't spend more than $1,000 to develop the website. And this is something that can keep working into the future. So I'm still very pleased with that. Now, I will tell you that if you have a chance to look at the website, and if there's information that you feel needs to be on there, please share it with us, because one of the things about building a website is that the data that goes onto it has to come from us. So please let us know if there's something else that you'd like to add.
Gene, I think Gordon is under Jackie on the screen. He's on my screen.
Okay. Gordon, would you like to offer the financial report? Okay.
Sitting here listening to this thing.
Unmute yourself.
It's okay. It's okay. I can do that.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Gordon, good to see
All
you.
right, good to see you, Gene, Carol, and everybody else. We get on into this report and get this out of the way and let you, I know you got a lot more to do. I started with the balance from the our meeting at October 17th of last year at the Woman's Club. And that balance was $34,067. Income was, I deposited dinner checks from both the October 17th meeting and the November 21st meeting there last fall. And that amounts to a total of $7,920. I deposited membership dues here for 2019-20, $4,050. And then deposited grants that we had received of amounting to $8,625 there. There was one donation for $50 and a memorial for $30. Brings the total income to $20,625. Debits, I've included the speaker honorarium for Bud Kennedy. I'll send his dollars. At the Woman's Club, that 2017 meeting, we paid out to Z's Cafe for their food catering there, $2,178.29. We also paid Chicago's liquor their fee for $291.82. And then we had membership directory printing expenses that we paid Falcon Document Solutions for $544.50. Per Carol Rourke's instructions, I paid out, wrote checks, 6 checks, grants to be paid to her recipient there. And she's got the details on that. And then the Society's box rental team due, paid that for, that was amounted to $118 there. And that brought the total debits to $13,355.68. Brings the total bank funds available for tonight, which is a new high for me, $41,320.07. Moving down to our certificates of deposit, I was happy to report that they moved a little bit beyond the herd of turtle feed, and the total balances for those two CDs is $12,056.85. It brings the total funds, as Carol mentioned to you, Gene, $53,376.92. For the 5 years or 6 years I've been doing this, first time this total balance has gotten beyond $50,000. So that's what Carol is referring to. And so happy.
Well, we also had fewer meetings last year, so
that's right. And
we had no reason to
we
spend.
had timing changes, Gene. You know, this first time I've deposited dinner checks for 2 meetings. Generally, it's just 1 meeting. $3,000 extra there. And then the timing on the grants received versus the grants paid out. And I think that contributes to it also. I don't rule out the possibility that I might have an error in there, so I'm still looking. I don't find an error that's ballooning this up. But anyway, happy to report that we're in good shape financially. And I'll turn it back to you, Gene.
Well, thank you very much, Gordon. If anyone has any questions for Gordon, you can, your navigation bar at the bottom, or yours may be at the top, wherever you've moved it to, there's a chat function. And you can use the chat function to write out a question, and then we can address it to the individual that it's directed to. So thank you very much, Gordon.
Yeah.
Next, I would like to ask Max Hill to give a report on membership.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Max.
I don't do
Speak up, though.
video.
Speak up.
Okay.
If you click
Last
that,
October, we had 116 memberships, 168 members. This year, we have 109 memberships and 149 members. You already mentioned the deaths. We have the following new
click
members:
that, he could see you.
Miss Judy Adler, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Ebert, Miss Ann Hodges, Mrs. Hollis Weiner joined late last year, and Ms. Carol E. Williams, all new members.
Okay. Any,
And that's,
I'm sorry, anything else?
yes, the yearbooks, I just mailed some of them out today, and the rest will be mailed out sometime this week,
Okay.
maybe Friday or Saturday. So,
Okay.
and is there some way I can speak to Ann Schaub? I notice she's listed here.
Yeah.
Ann? Hey, Ann?
She is muted at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Hey, Ann, I never received a check from you.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I
So
see
you're
one.
not in the yearbook, but I guess you can pay online. So
Okay. I can,
And we've had a number of people already pay online, and I asked the first person who did it, was it an easy process? And they commented about how easy it was. So hopefully that will keep people current in the organization. Well, thank you very much, Max.
Yeah.
Okay, next we need to have a report about our grants. And Dr. Ron Tyler, he is the new chairman of this endeavor. So, Dr. Tyler?
Well, I just received the material from Carol. I've had a chance to go through it. Got a little feedback here because Paul is pushing the up button.
You tend to be giving us some feedback there, Ron.
And I believe our schedule calls for us to organize our committee and send out the announcements after the first of the year. So we've got a little time to think about that. And that's probably a good thing since Gordon reports that we have more money than ever. So we'll get organized and send out the announcements. Carol put together very complete files. There are a large number of organizations that we are mailing our information to now. So we may have some really needy applicants as a result of this pandemic.
Well, and one of the nice things is that when Carol put together information, we put it on the website. So if you look under under grants, you can see organizations that we have given money to in the past, and there's information about how organizations can appeal to try to get money for the future.
That probably will get us some more applications.
Fantastic. Anything else, Dr. Tyler?
I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we're at that point in the evening where I think we've all wanted to be because we're excited about hearing our speaker this evening. And without any further ado, I'll ask Carol Rourke to introduce our speaker. Carol, unmute yourself, Carol.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. All is well. I was trying it, but finger touch didn't work. Thanks to everybody for being here. As some of you know, I was pulling my hair out trying to figure out how we were going to do this online, and I think we have acquitted ourselves well for our inaugural voyage into the digital age. So, Bud, you can laugh at us, but we're moving from the 19th to the 21st century. And one thing that I do want to say is that from what I understand, if when Bud's speaking, you want to see his full face screen, you want to use the perspective view instead of the gallery view on your.
Well, and when he starts to speak, I will make sure that he has the spotlight for everyone.
Good, thank you. And most of you probably know Bud. If there's any one person at the Star Telegram that people know, if you were just to query people on the street, it would be Bud Kennedy. Because a Fort Worth native, he always seems to be everywhere covering the subjects that he loves. And I bet you can name them for me: food, politics, and everything Fort Worth. But it didn't start that way. Today he writes about everything from, and I stole this, it's not mine, I'm plagiarizing, everything from guacamole to gun control. But he started out as a sports writer and an announcer. I didn't know he announced high school football games, but he did. But perhaps not too surprisingly, the first item I was able to find in the Star Telegram historical archives was a letter to the editor that Bud wrote, ran on September 27th, 1970, and it was urging Fort Worth schools and the school board not to burn their trash, but to let the city pick it up. So serious, hard news. In 1971, while he was still in high school, Bud became a stringer for the Star Telegram, covering a football game in which his beloved Arlington Heights Yellow Jackets were clobbered by the San Angelo Bobcats. After graduating from Arlington Heights and TCU, Bud worked for the Austin American-Statesman as a sports writer and copy editor. He then made a detour to the dark side in Dallas a bit before returning to the Star Telegram in 1981. And regular promotions followed. Sports editor in 1982, then to Arts and Entertainment, where he was named Star Time editor in 1985. And we all know how really old we are if we remember Star Time. And I think he had a stint in there as Arts and Entertainment editor as well. And he was finally named to the paper's editorial board in 2018. So now he's a real mover and shaker. And whether you agree with Bud or not, on both sides of the issues with him, he keeps his finger on Fort Worth's pulse, and he knows our history. So please welcome Bud Kennedy as he shares his stories about his weird and wacky 50 years with the Star Telegram.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. You really dug back in the archives for that. And, yes, I was upset about the smoky incinerators that just spewed ash over the high school all the time. As a matter of fact, I spoke at the school board addressing them, saying that they ought to do something about this dirty air over the high schools. And that was covered by Star Telegram reporter Bob Ray Sanders, who quoted me in his school board story that night. So I always had a little bit of it up on Bob Ray Sanders. I always say that at least I'm a little younger than Bob Ray because he quoted me in his school board story. But thank you. Yes, I started out wanting to change the world, and the world didn't want to be changed. So I got into sports after all. About a 14-year detour to the sports desk. But last month marks 50 years since my first byline, which was that high school football story. And it's been 33 years since my very first and very nervous column in the paper. I tell people that I've been doing this 33 years and I haven't been fired, sued, or shot at. So I consider that a plus, although some people would say maybe I haven't been doing it right. I just got to tell you, I've been really lucky. I was lucky to get a job in the first place. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But, the thing is, the fact of working at the Fort Worth Star Telegram is we change editors and owners so often, nobody ever stays around long enough to get rid of me. I've written for the Star Telegram under 6 different owners, 7 different publishers. I can't even count how many editors. And we've been at 3 different addresses. Right now, we're all writing from home. They wouldn't even know where to find me if they wanted to get rid of me. I figure I'm such a dinosaur. I figure that I've used 5 different devices to write the same bad stories for 50 years. I've used manual typewriters, electric IBM typewriters, these TI data terminals that were called Silent 700s, the Radio Shack Model 100s that were kind of a workstation, and then all the XTs and PCs. The first XT I bought, it would cost $2,000. It had a 20 megabyte hard drive. Man, I was really living high with that. You know, the fact is now I'm considered a dinosaur. I go back to the 1970s and hot lead newspapers, smoky newsrooms. I have my old column mugshot, my first column mugshot. It's in metal and wood. It's a piece of metal type the first time my columns ran in the Fort Worth Press. The Star-Telegram, we had reporters and sports writers with spittoons by their desks. They had whiskey in the bottom drawer. You know, the difference in working at the Press and at the Star-Telegram was at the Star-Telegram, the reporters kept the whiskey in the drawer. At the Press, it was on top of the desk. Both papers, open windows, no air conditioning, everybody smoking everywhere. It was like the movie The Front Page, except it was in the 70s. And these composing rooms where the hot lead was all put together in the paper, and the press rooms. You know, I'm so old, I remember when printers weren't appliances. They were people. You had to deal with printers to get the newspaper printed. And they were usually drunk people, and you had to beg them to help make up your pages. Nowadays, if you wanted to go into the press room and shout, "Stop the presses," first of all, you'd have to drive to Plano. Second, the papers would mostly be printed in the minute it took to get them stopped. It's a different era. And I remind myself every day when we have that morning news meeting on Zoom. Now, I'm talking to reporters who barely remember 9/11, but on my desk at work down at 307 West 7th, I have an old manual typewriter from the Press just to show them how it started. You know, I guess I'm going to explain how I got hired, how I got started. I grew up typing on one of those old manual typewriters, the Smith Corona. We had it. It was one of my toys when I was a kid growing up. I'd sit there and retype stories out of the Press. I heard Dan Jenkins tell this story once. I think he stole it from me. I told the story too. Anyway, I'd sit there and retype stories because it was a toy in our house. That's all I really do for a living today is I type. I grew up reading the Press and the Star-Telegram every day when we could afford the Star-Telegram. And I kind of thought I liked newspapers. They were fun. At Stripling Junior High, I went to the counselor's office in 7th grade, and I told them I wanted to sign up and be on the newspaper staff, the Hornet Herald. Well, Mr. Calvin Pettit shook his head, and he said, "Buddy, I don't think you have any aptitude for that." Well, there are plenty of people in Fort Worth who think he was right. Well, by the time I got to high school, I was told I didn't have any aptitude for journalism. I kind of adjusted my ideas a little bit. I got to high school and, I kind of thought maybe I wanted to be a TV news anchor. I liked the guy who read the news on Channel 5. His name was Bob Schieffer. He's sitting right over my shoulder here. And when I got to high school, the journalism teacher drafted me at Arlington Heights. She came out and asked who I was and what I was doing and what she, of all things, totally strange kid. She said, "What's your ambition?" And I said, "Well, I want to read the news on TV like Bob Schieffer." And she said, "Then you need to sign up for my journalism class." So she drafted me into journalism. And the second semester, that's September, the second week, that's September, just a kid, a junior, I'd been doing statistics for the football team. So she made me sports editor. So the second week, the Star-Telegram calls the Jacket Journal. The sports editor of the Star-Telegram calls and he said, "We need help this week. Arlington Heights is playing in San Angelo. We don't want to send a reporter all the way to San Angelo. And the paper down there won't help us. So we need somebody to call us." He said, "I tell you what you do, bud." He said, "Just call in and tell us the score of the game and who scored the touchdown." They said, "We'll make up a story in the office and we'll pay you $10. So this sounded great to me. Maybe it was a little bit of subterfuge. I was already engaged again, but I was going to call in notes. They were going to make up a story and look like somebody was at the game. It sounded all right to me. So I go down, I sit in the press box, I get my big long yellow pads out, I keep all the play-by-play, I keep all the statistics, I call in, I've got all the details. So after the game, I go to the payphone in San Angelo, and I get to the payphone, I call, and the phone rings, and the woman answers the phone. She said, "Star Telegram." And I said, "Hi, Sports Police." She said, "Hold, please." So then she transferred me. So so then somebody else says, "Star Telegram." And I said, "Hi, I've got the Heights San Angelo game." And she said, "Okay, hold on." So then she transfers me again. So this time, somebody picks up the phone and she says, "Okay, hi." She said, "What's your name?" I said, "Bud Kennedy." And I heard her typing already. I tap, tap, tap to tap, tap to tap to tap to tap. And then she said something. I had no idea how to answer this question. She said, "What's your credit line?" I didn't know what a credit line was, but I knew that I was supposed to know what a credit line was. So I just gave the best answer I could think of. I said, "Well, whatever the regular one is, I guess." And so I heard her go tap to tap to tap to tap to tap to tap. I thought, is she typing what I'm saying? And then she said, "Okay, where are you?" And I said, "San Angelo." And I heard tap to tap, tap to tap. I thought, oh my gosh, she's taking this down. She's typing what I'm saying. And then she said, "Okay, go." And I said, "Go?" And she said, "Yeah, go ahead and give your story." And I said, "Well, I don't have any story. They told me just to call in the scoring and you all would write a story." I didn't write a story. And she was very insistent. She said, "Oh no, they transferred your call to me. I take stories. That means you need to dictate a story." It was my second week in high school journalism. So what do you learn in the beginning of high school journalism? I barely learned the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Okay, I knew that. I knew a little bit about how to write a sports story. So I took a deep breath and I started. I said, the San Angelo Bobcats rode a time-consuming rushing attack to a 34-14 victory over the Arlington Heights Yellow Jackets at Bobcat Stadium Friday night. That took me about 20 minutes. And she said, "Okay, great. Keep going." I said, "Keep going?" She said, "Yeah, you're doing fine. Keep going." So I dictated about 6 more paragraphs of who scored what when. I gave her all the statistics. And all the way back from San Angelo, I thought, they'll never print that. Some editor will catch that. They'll say, "Oh, no, we don't print him. He's in high school. You know, we'll do it professionally the way we're going to do it here." So anyway, we got back. Of course, we didn't go home. We went to the Pancake House. So we're at the Pancake House. And a little truck pulls up. Guy with a load of papers comes and puts them in the rack out front. It's a Saturday Morning Star Telegram. And so I go out with my dime back then, and I get a paper. And I look through, nothing on the cover. And there at the bottom left hand of the second page of the sports section, it says, "Jackets pummeled by San Angelo." And it says, "By Bud Kennedy, special to the Star Telegram." And it has the story word for word, exactly the way I wrote it. So I thought, I'm in. They like me. They printed my story exactly the way I wrote it. They gave me a special credit line. Wow, this is it. I'm in. They loved it. I'm going to keep doing stuff for the Star Telegram. I'm going to keep working. And so then on Monday, I just kind of kicked back, waited for my next assignment. So the Star Telegram sports editor called Monday. He was mad and he was screaming. And so Gerald Garcia was really angry and he said, "Bud Kennedy, what are you doing?" He said, "What were you doing out there Friday night?" He said, "You can't write stories for the Star Telegram. You didn't follow instructions. We told you to call in notes. You weren't supposed to write a story." He got madder and madder. He said, "Bud Kennedy, you can't write stories. You're still in high school." Finally, he got maddest of all. He just kept screaming, and I was going, but I thought she. He said, "Bud Kennedy, that's it." He said, "You cannot take directions. You can't follow instructions." He said, "Bud Kennedy, you will never again do anything for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And he slammed down the phone. So here I am, second week of high school journalism. I'm pretty much out of business. I've been blackballed by the hometown newspaper. I'll never write anything for the Star-Telegram. And I thought, well, what can I do? Maybe I could get a job in Waco. Maybe I could go to Wichita Falls. I'm just trying to think where I could go or where I could get a job. And then Wednesday, the same week, 2 days later, the phone rings again in the newspaper office, and it's Gerald again. And he says, Bud Kennedy? And I said, yes, sir. I thought he was going to holler at me some more. And he said, we're a little short on help this week, he said, and I said, yes, sir. He said, we can't let you cover Heights games, but could you go out to Crowley on Saturday and cover the game the way you did this week? And I said, well, yes, sir. And he said, we'll pay you $5 extra. So everything was better, and I was in after that. So that's how I got started. The Star-Telegram blackballed me for 2 days and then hired me back. All through high school, I covered high school sports, basketball, track, and swimming, all kinds of little oddball sports as a correspondent. I was in the baseball press box covering a baseball game at the end of the year when I was getting out of high school, sitting next to the press sports writer, Whit Canning. Whit was going on and on. He said, "Mo, I'm sick of working here. I'm sick of that place, Andy Anderson. I'm so tired of working there." He said, "I'm going to go in tomorrow morning and quit." And so I just said, "Oh, really?" So the next afternoon, I went down to the press, and Andy Anderson looked at my resume, and he said, usually we wouldn't hire an intern right out of high school. He said, but we had a guy quit this morning and left us in a bind. He said, so we can start you Monday. We'll pay you $90. So I started full-time at the press at $90 a week. The second week out of high school, I was in the press box at Arlington Stadium covering the brand new Texas Rangers in 1972. Didn't even know which team was in which league in Major League Baseball. If it wasn't Carter and Polly and Dunbar, I didn't know much about it, but I was, by golly, in the Rangers press box. So I went from the press to Austin and then back to Dallas for a couple of years and wound up coming back to the Star-Telegram as sports writer. I moved to features and started writing about food, which was another lucky little sideline. And then, so I went from sports writer to features writer and editor. And then in 1987, I started writing a column. I was really lucky there too. The Star-Telegram evening paper columnists had all retired. Jim Trinkle, Tony Slaughter, and the late Sitzy Stewart, who you remember today, had all retired at once. And so the editors came to me and they said, Bud, they said, we're short on columnists for the evening paper. And Gerald Zinnick and Guy Unax both leaned in, and Gerald said, he said, you write really good memos. I'm the only newspaper columnist in history who ever got a job because of his memos. I've prided myself on writing one-page memos with a lot of bullet points and being really direct. So I started writing a column. I went on to cover 2 Super Bowls, 5 political conventions, interviewed 1 president, George H.W. Bush, and of course, my share of disasters. I'm talking about 17 sessions of the Texas legislature. Now, the Texas legislature is, if you think it's bad now, you should have seen what it was like in 1989 or 1991. I go back to the days when on the last days of the legislature, they backed up these beer and whiskey trucks right up to the Capitol door and just unloaded cases of beer and liquor and stacked them throughout the hallways of the Capitol. It was a wide open party all day long on the last day of the legislature, even for the underage interns. I thought there might be a column in that. So I wrote a column about the biggest underage drinking party in the whole state of Texas. The next year, Speaker Gib Lewis shut it down. And then, I ought to mention, since I've talked about Gib, the time that I think the Speaker of the Texas House threatened my life. There was a scandal in Austin that involved Gib and a lobbyist. They were going to the Los Hados Resort in Manzanillo. They'd gone over Easter weekend. So the paper set me down to take photos of the room where they stayed. But they only sent me for one day to Manzanillo and back. The headline said, "Here's the suite where Speaker Gib Lewis got lobbied." A few weeks later, we were in the Caravan of Dreams nightclub, a big crowd. I was waiting in the men's room when Gib comes out. He jabs a finger at me and he says, "You're a dead man." And then he takes a couple of steps, he turns around and says, "But you don't know how." You know, the Houston Chronicle did a front page story about that. But Gibbs said it was only a prediction. I'm pretty used to getting knocked around, getting complaints. After all, my first job at the press was covering minor league ice hockey. Nothing prepared me better for covering the 2016 presidential campaign than covering minor league hockey when I was a kid. There was constant abuse, name calling, physical abuse. I was shoved out of the locker room by the Dallas Blackhawks coach. That was from the players and their own coach in Fort Worth when they didn't like the story. One time I was on my way back up to the press box, start of the third period, and I had a beer in my hand. We used to drink while we were working. We don't anymore. So one of the team employees was standing there where you go into the press box. And he just said, "You," and he kind of blocked my way. He kind of looked at me and kind of frowned, and he kind of, backhanded the beer in my hand. He said, "Enjoy your beer." And he slapped the hand with a beer and spilled some of it. So I took the rest of it, and my first reaction, dumped the rest of it right on top of his head. So then he reared back and took a swing at me, but I grabbed his arm and bear hugged him like this, and he lost his balance and fell backward over the next row of seats, down into the next Coliseum seats. I looked down, all the hockey players are looking up from the ice to see who's fighting up in the press box. I just waved them, and they looked back down, nodded, and started play back up. That was the only fight I've ever had. I came close a couple of times in 2016. And there have been readers who gave me a hard time over the years. There were a few, not so many anymore, this is true with all of us at the paper, who called in death threats. Some of them were serious. There was one fellow that called in threats to a lot of us. He would actually use a disguised voice, and he would pretend to be Jack Nicholson. And he would have all these calls with machine gun fire and bombs going off. And he would call Bob Ray, he would call Molly, he would call me, and he would say, "You know what I'm gonna do to you." And then we'd hear this machine gun fire or something. And he called us. It was always 3 a.m, something like that. We all kind of got used to it. We knew who he was. He was a threatening guy. We kind of people watched him. But it was something that was routine. It was part of working at the paper. Well, one night I was working overnight on something. I was working real late. Phone on my desk rang at like 3:15 in the morning. I was so punchy, I didn't know what to do. So I just picked it up normally. I said, "Bud Kennedy." We had caught him for a second, but then he started in. He said, "Bud Kennedy, you know what I'm gonna do to you." And I didn't even think. I just get around. I said, "Hey," and I said, "I know what you called about, but I'm working on my food story right now. I need a little help on something." And he went, "Yeah." Well, and we knew with white supremacists that all the ones who called or said letters came from one of two places, either Haltom City or White Settlement, almost all of them. So I had a 50-50 chance of being right. So I guessed, and I said, "You live out on the west side, west of town, don't you?" And he said, "Yeah." So I said, "Will you ever go to that barbecue place down on Highway 80 West? Because that's what I'm writing about this week." And he said, he's still in his character voice. He says, "No, I go to Soda Springs Barbecue on Clifford. They got better sauce there." So all of a sudden, he's telling me about the better sauce now. So, from then on, he would still call and leave death threats for everybody else at the paper. But he would call my phone in the middle of the night and he would say, "You gotta try the cheeseburger at Rufus Grocery on Hazel Avenue." And so I am the only journalist in America who got white supremacists to call in barbecue and burger tips. So I think that's a great, I thought I was really lucky. I've always thought I've been really lucky to cover politics and food both. My hero, A.J. Liebling, the New Yorker, covered politics and food in the 50s. Johnny Apple did it at the New York Times in the 70s. It's a great compliment because everywhere you go, you try the food, you write about the food, you weave it in the story. You see how they do it now on the circus on Showtime. They're always talking about the food. There was one day it wasn't so good to be a food writer, and that was the 4th of July bean cook-off in Granbury, Texas. And, you know, it was a beautiful sunny day, and Congressman Joe Barton and I were the judges. And we got there and they said, "Oh, we're so happy to have you. It's a wonderful day. We are so lucky. We are so gratified. We have 72 bowls of beans for both of you to try today." And Joe and I looked at each other and said, "Well, okay." So they put us at a table side by side and they started bringing beans. And we had a couple of tastes of this and a couple of tastes of that. And some of them were orange and some of them were kind of purplish and some of them looked like kidney beans and some of them looked like they had, I don't know what in them. They had all kinds of unnatural substances, but we were trying them all. Well, you know, about the 47th bowl of beans, Joe turns around behind him and he gives a little finger wave behind him like this. And all of a sudden, his aide comes rushing in from the side and grabs him up, bear hugs him out of the chair and says, "It's an emergency. It's an emergency. The congressman's been called away. We have to leave immediately. It's an emergency." He literally lifts him up and carts him off and leaves me there with the other 30-some bowls of beans. So all I can tell you is I got through those 72 bowls of beans, but I was driven home by a friend afterward, and I was virtually immobilized. I got home at 4:15 that afternoon, and I went to bed and did not get up until the next day. Never again will I judge the Granbury bean cook-off. So that's, you know, that's I don't have many never agains, but I'll never again judge a bean cook-off. You know, I want to leave room for questions. I'm trying to remember some serious things about the Star Telegram. It's all been so much darn fun. There are so many things I could tell you about what we did after hours, the bars we went to, but I still have a job. So I'm going to be real careful what I say about all that. I do remember being in the newsroom for the big news stories, the Reagan assassination attempt, the Challenger blowing up, everybody gathering around the tiny TV and sports to see what was happening, going to the old wire ticker machines to see, you know, the paper and the ink and the ribbons and to see the actual printout of the news bulletins and see what was happening. You know, and all the change of the paper. We went through the Cap Cities ownership when the Star Telegram wanted to be a great national newspaper. We won Pulitzers, one for reporting, one for photography. Our sports sections, I'm very proud, we're always ranked top 3 in the country. We went through the Knight Ridder and McClatchy era. They didn't quite have as much vision for what to do with us. They didn't have any other papers in Texas and didn't quite understand what to do with the market. They were more interested in building up Kansas City. Now we belong to a New Jersey hedge fund, Chatham. There's a good sign. They list us as one of their major papers. When they talk about their most important papers, they list Kansas City, Sacramento, Miami, and Charlotte. You know, but the whole company now has fewer people putting out 29 newspapers than we used to have working for the Star Telegram. And when I worked for the paper in high school, it had about 100 reporters and editors. That grew to more than 400. You know, now we have about 30. But some days this year, we have had in a single day, we've had 2 million readers on the Star Telegram website. That's more than ever read the newspaper when it was the great Amon Carter, Tops in Texas, delivered from here to Roswell, New Mexico, you know, circulation. People ask, what would Mr. Carter think? I promise you, he would think we should run a 27% profit margin like his papers always did. He'd be happy to know that we still have 2 million readers some days, because that's 2 million people around the world who still find their way to a little piece of Fort Worth. I'd love to have any questions. I love talking to this group. All of you are my really good friends. Every one of you that I've seen so far at some point has helped me do a story. And I'm really grateful. I'm not going to send you the check for it, but I'm really grateful that you helped me. And now if you have any questions, toss them my way.
And if anyone has any questions, please type it in the chat function, and then I will convey it to Bud here. So I'm looking, Bud, I have to admit, your story about the beans, I had the opportunity to judge a barbecue contest, and I selected ribs. Well, it was in Meridian, Texas, and come to find out, I took a great big bite of the first rib, and there was this gentleman in a pair of overalls and a John Deere hat sitting next to me, and he said, "Son, you might want to slow down. So we have 72 entrants." And by the time we finished,
I had beans.
yeah, by the time we finished, it was just, yeah, it was kind of crazy. Okay, Bud, Carol Rourke is asking you to tell about Sue McCafferty and the lobsters at the Stockyards Hotel.
Well, now, I don't remember that story, so Carol's going to have to refresh my memory a little bit.
Well, unmute Carol so you can refresh his memory.
Okay, Bud. This was one of the columns I ran across, and it was absolutely hilarious. Apparently, Sue McCafferty and a group of her friends checked into the Stockyards Hotel to have a party, and everything, absolutely everything went wrong. And she was really mad and was stomping around looking for management. And so the manager said, it's okay. We'll make it up to you. You can come back and we'll have lobster for you. And so she was a bit mollified, and she and her friends came back, and they tried to switch on the lights, and the lights wouldn't work. And they were trying to get around in their room, and she went into the bathroom and she looked in the tub, and there were a tub of live lobsters.
So they had lobsters for her.
So they had lobsters, and she immediately went screaming for management again. And they went downstairs after she reamed everybody out. They went downstairs to eat at the restaurant, and they were served up lobster, only the lobster was smoking a cigar on the platter. And you wrote it's a really hilarious, I think, a nice about it. I thought for sure you might remember that. But since she was such a near and dear history person, I thought that might ring a bell with you.
Oh, she was so much, I mean, I think of her all the time on all the Stockyard stories. And when I was out there in Mule Alley the other day, I thought of her, and because she wanted everything to be right. And she called me when she thought things weren't right. And she wasn't afraid to let anybody know. So yeah, Sue was a wonderful, charming friend. I loved writing those funny, charming stories and those people stories, and some of those I loved it. It was very flattering when people would say, "I love your column today. It reminded me of Georgia Dolan." Those were fun columns to write. We do more political and news columns now because that was what readers read more, and frankly, it's something that I have a lot of experience in. You found since high school. When you grow up in Texas named Kennedy, when you grow up in the 60s named Kennedy, you learn something about politics and you're interested in it. But I love telling people stories and telling fun stories about all the people that I grew up with. You know how few people get to do this in all the newspaper business and all the news business. How few people get to tell the stories about the people you grew up with in the town you grew up in, with people you love. I'm very, very lucky to get to do that here.
Well, Bud, Nance, you say that. Subi Green, one of our members, wants to know what was your favorite role at the Star Telegram?
My favorite role? Well, the clover leaf at the Piccadilly. No, I'm kidding. And this is going to be serious, but the the night that I remember the most and keep thinking about and have thought about so much lately is very serious. It was my father died, and he'd been in the hospital for 2 months lingering. He could not get his breath back after an open heart surgery, and it was this long lost process and this grieving for him. And there had been, some grieving lately that's made me think of this. But so the day before he died, I was helping my mother shop for what clothes she would wear the funeral. And we were at Montgomery Ward, and I came out the east door of Montgomery Ward on 7th. And I looked, and back behind the skyline, there was one really dark cloud, not a big cloud, but one incredibly dark cloud. And I thought, well, what's that? What's going on over there? And it was the I got in the car and turned on the radio, and they said, we have reports of an airplane down at DFW Airport. It was the Flight 191 crash. And so I told my mother, I need to take you home. I need to go to the office. And I went to the office and set up, and I said, okay, what's going to be my job? What can I do to help? And they said, okay, you need to sit here at this desk. And they said, we have reporters at all the hospitals, and you take their notes, as they call it, notes from the survivors. Well, if you remember the Flight 191 crash, I think there were only 9 survivors. And so what I wound up doing that night, they gave me all the names of people who had died, and the reporters at all the hospitals gave me these names, and I started compiling the names that we got before Delta had a passenger list out. And we were getting all these calls from Daytona Beach, Florida, where the flight originated, and said, do you know anything about my uncle? Have you heard about my brother? Do you know about my daughter? And they're just one name after another. And I said, and I would have to look, and I would say very, very, seriously, I'd said, all I could tell them, I said, this is not official, but that name is on my list. I'm keeping a list of those who have passed away, and that name is on my list. And so the night before I buried my father, I gave this news to dozens of people who suddenly found out that they'd lost a loved one. And, then I got up the next morning and buried my own father. That's probably the night that I remember most in the newsroom. The other night that I remember most, of course, is when the 2000 tornado kind of blew up the back of the Star Telegram and actually knocked out windows in the back of the paper. And most of us went down in the press room that night. A couple of people went up to see what was going on. I came up out of the press room, and there we were holding the door under the 6th Street overhang and just cracking it open to feel the force of the tornado blowing through. And you could just barely crack it open, or it would pull the door out of your hands. So I could just barely feel the force of the storm, and then close it back up and go back down. But and then we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what was going to happen. And there were about 20 of us there. And, we came wandering up out of the basement and walked through our delivery area there at 6th and Taylor. And I looked up at the tower, and all the windows broken out, and all the lights and fixtures and wiring and everything hanging out. And I looked up and I just said, well, this was the big one. And so then we all went back inside and went back to work that night. But the night of the 191 crash, between those two, by the way, I covered a plane crash myself. When the second Delta plane crash, 1141 at DFW, I actually raced to the airport and got behind the berm where the crash was. And I got over the berm. There was this burning plane right in front of me. I was one of the first people there. And there were people running toward me carrying suitcases and bags and everything. And I said, well, where are the people from the plane? And this woman looks at me and says, we are the people from the plane. So literally, I stopped and started interviewing people. I interviewed people running from the slide, leaving a burning plane. And I'll never forget that day and that look and that smell, particularly that acrid smell of the seats burning and the smoke and the jet fuel and everything. And that actually caused me to be a little behind on 9/11, because from that day, every time there was a plane crash, I shut everything down and took the day off. And so when the first plane went to the tower, I started writing about ice cream at the back porch and shut everything down. And friends had to get a hold of me on text message later and say, hey, start paying attention again. So you asked what was the best, and those are just some of the days that were the most memorable and not happy days, but some of the more memorable days.
Well, Dr. Tyler is curious, Bud. He says that sports writing seems to have changed a great deal because you had such an earlier deadline because of the press time. How would you describe that?
Sports writing was changing when I came to work. Of course, I worked at the Press, which was an evening paper. So the challenge was to write the stories for people who already knew the score. And so the way the Press built its great tradition of the Wacky Shera, the Dan Jenkins, the Bud Shrake writers. Bud Shrake, covered junior high football for the Press and went on to write novels and write for Sports Illustrated. They were all these great writers who had all night to drink and write and think and come up with a good story by 6:15 in the morning. But the rule was you couldn't tell the score because everybody already knew that. You had to build up characters and craft the drama and you had to write a mini novel on every game. So the sports writing was changing then. It changed more as more people, already knew the score, and it drifted away from these long game stories. And then about 10 years ago, sports writing became more of this just constant news feed of who's injured and who's playing and not playing and who's going to start and who's been arrested and what's going to happen next. And I mean, now we have sports writing with no game stories at all. There are days we don't run game stories because everybody follows the game on their phone. There's no need to run stories about games. Now the newspaper and the news business websites too are in a real identity crisis about sports journalism because nobody's clicking on it. The people are watching events, but they don't really care to read about it afterward. And all of sports journalism has suffered most with the demise of newspapers. Sports journalism has been hit hardest and suffered most and lost the most readership. I don't think they know what to do since people have all this instant information on their phones.
And that raises another question that popped up. Is there a future for young journalists in print journalism?
There is some future, and we just don't know what it is yet. People have a hunger for local news. You could see the hunger for information on COVID, what the county was doing, what the state was doing. You can see the appetite for, when people, once people buy a house and pay taxes, people want to know about tax rates. Are my taxes going up? How are they spending my money? You can see that there is a strong appetite for people who want watchdog journalism, who want to read about ethics, transparency, accountability, results. Is the government doing what they should be doing? Am I getting my money's worth? What's happening in my town? What's opening? What's closing? For me, the most read stories now are when a new barbecue restaurant opens, or the other day over by TCU when the Los Vaqueros location opened. Those really drive more readers than the political columns. The political analysis columns are good for everybody to read, but when you get new enchiladas, that's what people want to know about.
Well, and we get political commentary 24 hours a day.
Oh yeah, you don't
get new enchiladas every day.
Yeah, even if it's interpretation of, here's why Watauga is going to go this way or whatever. People just don't want that. People want to know about the new place to eat. So, we're all just kind of grasping, but there is always going to be an appetite for that local news. And it's the challenge is getting people to pay for it. And as you can see, we are no longer, the advertisers have gone away to, first the classified ads went away to Craigslist, and the display advertising was lost along with a lot of the small businesses who were eaten up by Amazon. Then the department stores started going away that were the big advertisers. So the classified and display have both kind of waned down, and so we have subscribers is who we count on. And we're hoping, although you can watch all the TV websites and get a little bit of news about Fort Worth, you can't get news about Fort Worth, Texas anywhere else like you can in the Star Telegram. So we're hoping that enough people will pay 50 cents a day so that we can keep providing.
Well, fantastic. Well, I'll ask one last time if there's any other questions, and I'm not seeing any. So, Bud, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us here on our virgin trip through Zoom world, and I think you've really made it a memorable experience.
Well, thank you. Everyone here is always welcome to email me at bud@budkennedy.com. Call me. I still return every call. The number is in the paper with a column, or you can find it online, or you can message me on Facebook or Twitter. You cannot contact me through your toaster, but I think just about any other appliance or website, you can probably find a way to contact me. So please ask questions, cuss me out. I'm thrilled to hear from you, and I'm thrilled to get to talk to this group.
Thank you. Okay, last order of business this evening. I want to make an announcement about when our next meeting will take place. It too will be in a virtual landscape, and it will be on Thursday, November 12th. And our speaker for that will be Michael Hazel. He will be talking about the Fort Worth Dallas Handbook Project. And at this point, we do have one meeting planned for early in the year that will also be virtual. We're hoping that later in the spring that good news will arrive and we will be able to reconvene in person. So just keep your fingers crossed, and hopefully that'll be the case. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this maiden voyage, so to speak. And if you have any questions or concerns, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a pleasant evening. And Subi, I guess you can stop recording now.